The world's on fire. Our river's gone dry. The rich are getting richer. They've left us out here to die. Mass migration. We got no place to hide. Who's against us? Who's on our side? Are they too dumb or are they just in on it? Liars and cheaters, a red-hot grip. Ditch the gaslighting gas bag that speaks in code. He's a faker, a shaker, a pontificating pantload. In this house of mirrors, we've hit the wall before it's too late. Let's go. Come on, y'all. It's border to border and coast to coast. It's real, it's facts, and it ain't no hoax. It's Podcast by George, and it's showtime, folks. Well, hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Man, it's early morning. This reminds me of my broadcast days back in the radio studios, man. We are doing the early drive time here, and I am excited, folks. This is a big one for me. We've got a real honor, a real hero of mine coming on the Podcast by George LiveLine this morning. It's Clare Daly. Clare Daly is a truth seeker. She's a truth teller, an Irish politician who's been a member of the European Parliament from Ireland for the Dublin constituency. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I like saying it that way. Since July 2019, she's a member of Independence for Change, part of the left in the European Parliament. And Clare has become an American folk hero for the American left because of her outspoken truth-telling when it comes to war and peace, climate destruction, and, of course, the persecution and the prosecution of Julian Assange. So let's take that off the screen and bring her on in and say good morning, hello, hi, how are you to Clare Daly. Hi, Clare.
Good morning, George. How are you? Fair play to you for getting up so early so we could chat.
Yeah, I know it is. Technology, it's amazing to me that we can even do this, but we've got a limited amount of time because she's very busy, obviously, very gracious to come on the show. So I want to get right to it here, Clare. When I reached out, you were, I think, heading to Pakistan. And this is from your Twitter feed. Privileged to be in the presence of so many engaged and well-informed Pakistani academics, workers, and activists. The people in power have misused it everywhere. And together we must try and build a better world. And I have had the issue in Pakistan on my podcast because of those biblical, devastating floods out there. And then when you were out there, that former PM or whatever got shot. So I don't know, tell us about Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it wasn't us. We didn't shoot him, but no, look, it was incredible. And whatever happened out there, I picked up some sort of a bug, so I'm not really myself. But other than that, it was incredible. And the reason I was actually there was precisely because of the climate disaster. In fairness, the Pakistani embassy have been really proactive in targeting the European Union in trying to get the West to focus on Pakistan and not simply in the area of donations, which are obviously needed, but more so really reparations. And we are on the eve of the COP talks, of course, where the big issue will be that countries like Pakistan are the victims of consumerism in the West. They contribute so little to the climate disaster overall, but yet they're the ones who've suffered the most. 33 million people displaced, a third of the country underwater. And that was the reason why we went to have a look at the devastation, to see the situation on the ground. And it was just an incredible experience from start to finish. Really high awareness of climate change because these are the people living it. But a really interesting country politically as well. As you say, Imran Khan was shot there. His march had left Lahore and was on the way to Islamabad when we were there. Coincidentally, we happened to be near his house when he got shot.
Wow.
He wasn't in it, and it definitely wasn't us. We were doing an interview with a famous Pakistani actress who lives around the corner for a TV show. Really good leftist former UN Pakistan ambassador who actually resigned in protest over the UN's role in the Iraq war. So a wonderful, wonderful woman. So we were around the corner, a lot of activity around Khan's house at that time. And then afterwards we heard he was shot. But I mean, I have to say the feedback of people weren't particularly troubled. It was more a graze. I think people's analysis of it was, look, he was going to win the elections whenever they were going to be held, but now he definitely is. And there wasn't a big mass panic or instability over it or anything like that. But an incredibly interesting country. Really, really engaged young people, political activists, and so on. Great spot altogether.
Well, what about Pakistan and that flooding? When I had the coverage on, I had the amounts that were being set in a mere pittance by the United States and other people compared to the war effort, compared to the $1 trillion a year in the National Defense Authorization Act here in the United States. Again, war gets the priority. People don't. Are they going to be able to recover from this? What's it like over there right
Well,
now?
that's a good point. I mean, what they say is like they've moved mountains, really. They've stabilized the situation a huge amount in most areas, except maybe the more isolated rural bits. But they tell us that all of their reserves now are empty. All of the warehouses, all of the emergency supplies, they're all empty, and they need to rebuild them up again. They also need to focus on resilience for the next time. And they want earlier warning systems and so on. They want better types of housing along the river baths. They may even have to address the whole area of relocating huge swathes of the population, which is going to be very difficult because people don't like leaving the areas where they come from, not to mind finding somewhere to put them. So that's huge. And one of the interesting and concerning things as well, of course, is that Pakistan is under an IMF program. Now, we in Ireland were under one of them before, and they are not nice, and they don't do any favors for the people, and they come with strict conditionality. And of course, now they're not going to have the resources to meet the repayments of the IMF loans that they have. So they've gone to the IMF, said, listen, lads, we've had a catastrophic environmental disaster here. We need a bit of slack. Those discussions are still ongoing, and it will be very interesting to see what conditions the IMF put on future loans, because interestingly, they've recently given a new loan to Tunisia, for example, to repay the old loan, which they couldn't pay. And the conditionality on that one is that they have to end food subsidies. So Pakistan doesn't need any pressure in that regard. Actually, it should be increasing food subsidies and other supports for its citizens. So that's a really important one to watch. Of course, the government of Pakistan and Pakistan traditionally has been very friendly to the US, but it's also, and correctly so, of the view that they want to do business with everybody, that they're happy to do work with China as well. That hasn't satisfied the US. They're very unhappy with that. But in fairness, Pakistan has held firm on that, and maybe that is another source of aid or pressure. But I do think the COP talks and the idea of the international community, these aren't donations. Like, we should be paying for the damage that the Western world has caused, yes, which people in the rest of the world are suffering and paying with their lives and livelihoods. So there needs to be this loss and damage scheme of big funds of money going back in. But of course, we also need to, in the West, address our overt consumerism. We need to look at degrowth and all of that stuff as well, if we're really to help Pakistan. They need to improve things as well. They say they're doing it. They have a limited budget, but it's the biggest talk. There are climate deniers still out there in the world, yes, but they're not in Pakistan. The dogs on the street talk climate change in Pakistan. It's up on the walls. The message is there. Everybody knows this is life and death.
Well, they're talking climate change. One of the places that they're not talking about it very much is here in the United States, Claire. We're today, ironically, this early morning show that we're doing, this is election day. We're in our midterms here. And when you look at the list of issues that Americans are concerned about, mostly, as always, the ugly Americans, I hate to say that, folks, they're concerned about themselves. They're concerned about their inflation rate and their own private economics. And this dovetails very nicely with this report that just came out that very few people have seen because it was just released by the Washington Post. Climate change is threatening things Americans value the most. And when you look through this, I don't want to read a lot because we don't have much time with Claire, but it says climate change is unleashing far-reaching and worsening calamities in every region of the United States. And the economic and human toll will only increase unless humans move faster to slow the planet's warming. Okay, we know that the things Americans value most are at risk, according to the National Climate Assessment authors. And here's something that, again, this segues with what Claire was talking about. Every part of the United States, as well as the world, is grappling with climate change, but not equally. Who's harmed the most? The least. The indigenous people here in the United States and the poor. And if you've seen Clare in front of Parliament railing about this on video, it's absolutely stellar. Water is life. That's what's going missing here because of this. Extreme events are wreaking havoc on homes and property. Okay, this is where I wanted to stop because I wanted to bring this up, Claire, because this dovetails into the, the ugly Americans thing. This is what actually may spur more change and action here in the United States. It's our stuff. This is what we seem to value the most, and it's all becoming at risk. Americans are going to fall down the ladder of this privileged situation that we exist in because we stole the country, basically, and this breadbasket land that we live in. And it's because of climate. It's bad, and it's going to get worse even here.
Yeah, and I mean, look, nobody is safe anymore. As we sit here now, there are temperatures of 30 degrees in France in November. There are people in Europe on the beach. It's never happened before in human history. And people might think, oh, sure, that's great. That's not great for agriculture, for food production, and so on. We've had rivers run dry in Italy and in other countries. We've had forest fires. We've had floods in mainland Europe with a massive destruction of livelihoods and agriculture, which are going to have a lasting impact on how we live our lives. This is serious. And it's really the case that the planet will not survive this if we keep going the way we're going. And I mean, the European Union is always waffling on about how it does brilliant work and sets great goals in terms of climate initiatives. In some ways it does, but they're not nearly good enough. And they've actually thrown them all out the window now that the war in Ukraine is on. They've actually abandoned all that now, and they've gone back to even producing coal. They're now taking coal back out of the ground because they don't want to buy gas from Russia. I mean, how mad is that? In order to fight and continue the war, they're prepared to jeopardize the future of the planet. I mean, we had the Nord Stream 2 gas explosion, releasing 30,000 tons of methane, the biggest catastrophic methane explosion that the UN in human history, and nobody's investigating who bombed that pipeline. There's serious climate stuff going on, and you won't have any stuff. You won't have a house or a holiday or a jet or whatever unless we change our ways and change them rapidly. And I think part of the problem is that the debate is, when it is held, is sort of puts the blame on the individual working class homeowner or whatever. It's that kind of blame that we have. We aren't to blame. Big business, the military, whose footprint doesn't ever get factored into it at all, big agri, they're the ones who are the biggest contributors to climate disaster. And we've got to start with them. All of us can mend our ways and help. But that's what we have to tackle, really, is the system of production that has a very small number of people benefiting from all of the spoils and the rest of the world sharing the crumbs.
Yeah, climate, war, and healthcare. That's my big three on the PBG, as I put it. That's what I talk about all the time. And that's what Claire's talking about. Before we lose her, I want to get her to talk about this a little bit because I was unaware of this. Again, going back to your Twitter feed, this survey, it reads almost one half of Ukrainians surveyed agreed it was imperative to seek a ceasefire to stop Russians killing Ukraine's young men. Slightly more than that one half supported negotiations with Russia on a complete ceasefire, with a quarter totally against and 1/5 neutral. Now, Claire, they're banging the war drum mightily over here. This kind of information is not being found or released. And I highlighted this little section down at the bottom where this header out of this article, it says that Ukrainians are divided. Yeah, they're divided, all right, but they appear to be divided on the side of peace to me.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I wouldn't like you to think that this is a mainstream view that's put out here either, because the propaganda you're talking about is absolutely in full swing here as well. That anybody who calls for peace is basically anti-Ukrainian, which is patently ridiculous. When if I was a Ukrainian mother or wife, I wouldn't want my husband being killed, that's for sure. And the survey indicates that that's the same. Now, this was an article in the Irish Times, which has been incredibly pro-war, I would say, completely hostile to me and my colleague Mick Wallace, to anybody actually calling for peace, although that's beginning to change because there's been huge movements now across Europe. We saw another big one in Rome over the weekend against NATO, against the war. And here we see in Ukraine itself. Now, it was done by an Irish academic who used a Ukrainian polling company. Now, obviously, people subsequent to that says, oh, this is all fake news. It's all completely flawed. But this is a Ukrainian polling company that's been used for other studies as well. So it's as good as any other polls that you will get. And as you say, it says, and what was interesting as well, that the nearer people were to the conflict, the more they were likely to support peace. Now, isn't it mad that we even have that discussion? Because it's not really that radical when you think about it. It's total common sense that anyone in a war, and every other war since history has started, the answer to it has been peace and a ceasefire. But this one, no, that isn't the answer. This one is the war has to keep going until Russia is defeated, which basically means that's not going to happen, because if that ever was going to happen, Russia would use the nuclear option, and that would mean the end of kind of life as we know it. So that isn't a solution. We need to stop this war now, and the people living it in the middle of it are the ones who are suffering most. And every day that goes by, they're the ones who suffer most. It's absolutely tragic, and the only winners are the US arms companies and NATO. And actually Europe and the European economies are going down the tubes quicker than you would think. There are job losses. There are people now getting ready to decide between whether they can heat or eat this winter with the rising fuel costs, despite the subsidies. This is madness. The European Union has shot itself in both feet at the behest of the US establishment. And it's incredible, the world, I suppose, fallout from this, because we go back to where we started the interview. When we were in Pakistan, we were in a factory that makes jeans for Europe. And they were making the point that because the contracts are negotiated in dollars, and because the war has resulted in the euro being destroyed now, so the price for the European suppliers to buy the Pakistani product in dollars has shot up. So the European suppliers are using their muscles to dumb down on the Pakistani factories, who are going to dumb down on their workers and their oppressed people already, to try and squeeze the last bit out of them. So even a poor jeans maker worker in a factory in Pakistan is paying the price of this war, while the shares for the arms companies go through the roof, and Ukrainian women lose their sons and their husbands, and indeed Russian women as well. It's utterly tragic and barbaric.
Well, we've run out of time, and I got to be respectful of Claire's time. I'm just honored to have her on the show. And by what you mentioned, Mick Wallace, greetings and felicitations to Mick Wallace. I mean, he's a kind of a folk hero here as well. And I keep showing your video clips in front of Parliament there, Claire. I guess the last question very quickly. Are you guys tilting at windmills over there? Here we have a progressive contingent in our Congress, which is so weak-kneed. It's invisible, basically. They're getting nowhere. They withdrew that letter that they submitted to Biden last week. How are you and Mick doing? Are you changing hearts and minds over there at all?
Well, it's actually incredible, right? And I mean, it was bizarre, and it shows how small the world has become. We were in Islamabad airport, and a man came running up to us saying, "Are you the Irish politicians? I love you guys. I follow you on social media."
Yeah.
Honestly, God, I'm not even messing. We're getting on the plane on the way back. This guy goes on, "I know you. I follow you." That's in Pakistan. We have a huge following in Afghanistan. We met a big group of Afghan refugees in Pakistan who heard of us through using the platform as well. Every single day, we are contacted by people from all over Europe, all over the world, Africa, the States, everywhere. People saying, it's a voice we don't hear. And isn't it scary? That's not actually, it's frightening. It shows, I suppose, the darker the sky, the brighter the star. I mean, we're only talking common sense. We're only talking what most people feel and believe. But most people's views aren't allowed to be heard in the mainstream, because the ruling elite have decided that there can only be one narrative. And we're moving into really dangerous territory whereby, you know, in the name of combating authoritarianism and in the name of democracy, Western societies are becoming increasingly authoritarian. I mean, the clampdown that we see at the moment is a total modern day McCarthyism. It's scary. And I mean, I just, that's why I think it's so great to have the opportunity to talk to you, to be able to share ideas and to have differences. I mean, what is wrong with having a different political view? We've been demonized by it. We're
Yes.
a public enemy number 1 and 2 in the Irish media, but I don't think that's reflective of the Irish public. It's had an impact on some people, of course it has, because if you keep repeating something often and people say, oh, there has to be some truth in it, the media wouldn't be going on about them all the time if there wasn't some truth. So it does have some effect, but I do think as the war goes on and people see it's them suffering and there's no end in sight, the narrative is beginning to change. And I think worldwide, a lot of it was changed even earlier on. So it's not all bad.
Ah, that's great. That's a great way to end. I'm going to send you on your way, folks. That's Clare Daly. Clare, thanks for coming on the show. I'd love to have you on again some point in the future, but I'm going to let you go for now because I know you're very busy.
Thank you so much, George. My pleasure.
Yeah, we'll talk again. I'm going to show some of your videos here when you get off because I just love these things. Your presentations before Parliament. We'll talk soon.
I hope you get back to bed and get a few hours sleep. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye. Folks, that's Clare Daly coming on live out there from the European Parliament. My God, Clare Daly, of course, is a truth seeker and a truth teller. As I mentioned at the beginning, let's get her LiveLine graphic back up here. Clare is, there she is. She's an Irish politician. She's been a member of the European Parliament from Ireland for the Dublin constituency now since 2019. And I mentioned these videos, the things that she talks about out there. And God, you see these and you think, I wish our politicians were like that. I wish our squad would stand up in front of the House of Representatives and say these types of things. Watch this now. I'll come back right after this. This is Clare Daly talking about, the hypocrisy that's taking place. Watch this video.
State sponsor of terrorism is a term of US law. It doesn't exist in EU law. But a Zelensky advisor called for it in the Parliament magazine, and here we are again reporting for duty. And all it will do is make peace harder to achieve. Exactly, of course, what the extremists want. No peace, no off-ramps, all bridges burning, and Ukraine a permanent abattoir in a suicidal holy crusade against Russia. So, if you want to start naming state sponsors of terrorism, let's do it. European sponsorship of Israeli terrorism in Palestine, Western sponsorship of Saudi terror in Yemen, ISIS, the product of French, American, British, Turkish and Gulf sponsorship in Syria and Iraq. Decades of right-wing US-backed terrorism against the Cuban Revolution, the Contras in Nicaragua, death squads in Guatemala, in El Salvador. Remember Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, horror after horror, terror after terror. There's nothing constructive about the pot calling the kettle black. Would you ever cop on, start championing peace and end the war, which is patently in the interests of EU, Ukraine?
God, is that any good? Oh man, I'm telling you, I just love that. That's Clare Daly in front of the Parliament talking about the Ukraine war and the futility of it and the precedent that has been set and this designation that they want to give countries and people that we don't like as terrorists. Okay, let's spread a little of that around, folks. That's Clare Daly. And I want to send out a special thank you to everybody that's joined here early this morning to watch this. I don't know exactly where they're coming in from, maybe Europe, actually, because it's very early in the morning here in the United States. And again, it reminds me of my old radio days. I'm up drinking coffee at 4 o'clock in the morning, getting a show ready to go. But we're not going to keep everybody here. We're going to wrap this up. This will go out, of course, and be on a replay basis now in the future. It'll also be available on iTunes, but the video will be on Facebook and YouTube archived, and you'll be able to watch this and rewatch it with the great Clare Daly. And of course, if you want to see all of my videos and if you want to hear all of these podcasts, go to podcastbygeorge.com and select a platform where you'd like to follow. You can subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Facebook. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up on those two platforms. That's where these video live lines are seen. And then if you want to just listen along as you go about your daily business, you can subscribe to iTunes and Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Deezer, Stitcher, places like that. You can do all of that on podcastbygeorge.com. But folks, that is going to do it up early in the morning here. Thanks again. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.